Hey everybody, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics. In this video we're going to talk about an alternate aiming technique for an optic blockage on the handgun. If you're a subscriber, you might be thinking we've kind of already covered this topic, at least 2 separate videos, and it's been touched on in others. And that's definitely true. But I've been experimenting with something for the past 1.5 years, and I'm finally confident in its viability to actually show you guys what I'm working with. The biggest problem with a handgun, with an optic, and literally the biggest problem, is if the optic window becomes blocked where you can't physically see through the glass, so you can't get your dots projection. We're talking about open emitter optics here, but this is the same would apply to any optic really if the window gets blocked and you can't see through it. If you can't see through the window on your optic, then your backup sights, whether they're irons to the rear or irons forward, can't be used because you can't see through them to actually line up those 2 iron sights. So some of the techniques that are out there have kind of been, well, best case scenario of a worst case scenario. How are we able to aim the gun? One of the techniques I talked about in previous videos, especially with the RMR because of its unique design, is you can actually bracket your bad guy using the 2 owl ears of the RMR body. However, that gives you horizontal alignment. It doesn't really give you elevation alignment. And the mechanical offset between the top of the optic and the bore axis, is exaggerated, and it takes a lot of time to get used to the fact that it often, when you're pressed in on the target, it seems like you're aiming lower than you really are. And this is just one of the complications that I was trying to come up with some way that I could inexpensively avoid. And it only cost me a paint pan. So my hypothesis was pretty straightforward. I wanted to add some degree of elevation detection, if you will, to the optic itself. If I'm lined up on the target and I've got him bracketed between those 2 owl ears, does that necessarily tell me if I've got any elevation or too much elevation on my barrel? Because I may not be able to see it because there's 0 contrast between the rear of the RMR window and the actual top of it. Unless it's super extreme where I could literally see my front side, I've got the gun elevated so much, I wouldn't necessarily be able to tell. So what I did is I took a paint marker and I gave myself center of the optic, gave myself an actual bead similar to what you'd see on a shotgun sight, and then I took that line and I carried it all the way over the top of the optic. And my hypothesis was, as long as I could not see that white stripe on the top of the optic body, I was going to be able to get practically accurate hits on the human form from reasonable distances versus just using the optic body itself. Of course, the whole purpose to this is to make sure in the event that my optic becomes blocked, I'm able to still deliver practically accurate shots on my bad guy. What is practically accurate? Again, this is something I've talked about before. My definition based on the target system I use is anything that's going to be in the high thoracic region of the body. That's where I want to be able to hit using an alternate aiming method. Of course, if I was able to use my dot or my iron sights, I would hold myself to a much higher standard of the distances I would shoot this from. But if I've got a little bit of distance and there's cover or concealment available to me, and whatever's blocking my window can be cleared out with a finger, then that's probably what I'm going to do. So this is an emergency technique only, and it's something that's very easy to develop as far as skill set wise, and it doesn't cost you anything more than a pen and the ammo to actually practice it. Now, proof of hypothesis, what I did is I just compared accuracy of the one optic, the one that I actually put the paint stripe on, and accuracy of just a traditional RMR shooting the same ammo, roughly out of the same guns. I tried it on a few different guns. We don't have to get right down into the minutia of exact spec guns for this purpose because everybody's guns are going to be a little different. And of course, people watching this may be like, well, I don't use an RMR. The same concept will work on a Delta Point or a Viper or a Venom or whatever you're using. My suggestion to you, though, in that case would be to actually measure the top of your optic window and find out what dead center is. And of course, do this with the RMR as well, but it's a little bit more critical with those round optic windows and optic shrouds that are out there, because eyeballing it may not get you dead center, and then of course you're shooting to the left or to the right out of the gate, and that's not something that we want. So first up, let's look at the optic, which actually has the improved aiming line, I guess is something I can call it. I haven't really thought of a name. You think I would come up with that before I did a video on it. But whatever, it doesn't matter. It's free to the world now if you want to use it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shoot it from 3, I'm going to shoot it from 7, and I'm going to shoot it from 15. Very reasonable distances for handgun accuracy. Very reasonable distances for maintaining that practical accuracy in the high thoracic region of the human body. Do 5 rounds, shooting 124 grain RUAG per distance. And what we're looking for is keeping those rounds inside of that B zone, or that thoracic region, if you will. Obviously, I want as many A zone hits as I can get, but that isn't necessarily something that's going to be practical considering the way that I'm aiming as distance increases. And of course, you can continue to take this back to whatever distance you want. But looking at 3 yards, pretty quick cadence and able to deliver the hits that I wanted to deliver. Didn't really have any issues there. Now, one of the questions that's going to come up is, do I look at the white line or do I look at the target? And the answer is, it kind of depends. Because the method is very similar to using just a bead sight on a shotgun, my suggestion to you is to actually focus on the white line for fine-tuning that elevation and use the bracket of the optic window itself for your horizontal alignment, your windage, if you will. Taking it back to 7 meters, cadence is still pretty good. Being able to reset that. I did walk a little bit more than I would have liked to, but you know, I wanted to use the first 5 rounds from distance. Each time I shot it, I didn't do any retakes on any of these because I wanted to have as organic as possible, as much data as I could give you in this video. I'm still pleased with the results. And then we take it back to that 15, another 5 rounds. At 15, this is usually, at these distances, 10, 15, 20, 25, so on and so forth. These are the distances where the size of the target and size of the optic really start to exaggerate extremely. If you think about, again, when I talked about that mechanical offset from the optic height to the actual window itself, there's 0.9 to 1.5, depending on the optic height, between your bore axis and the top of your optic that you're using to aim. When we get back that far, we tend to either aim way too high because we're exaggerating the actual mechanical offset, or we aim way too low and we shoot the target in the legs or we hit the ground. Of course, that's dependent on the shooter and the shooter's skill. But as you can see from 15, I'm still able to deliver really quality, practically accurate hits. Next up, shooting from the same 3 distances, 5 rounds at 3, 5 rounds at 7, 5 rounds at 15, using 124 grain RUAG out of a Glock 17 that's been modified by Agency Arms, which really isn't necessarily important to the practicality of this. I'm using the unimproved optic, just using the RMR bracketing, or the guillotine method as it's sometimes called. What we're looking for again is at least accuracy within that thoracic cavity, that B zone, if you will. At 3 yards, it was really good, really quick, really point of aim, point of impact as far as my presentation and my alignment of the bracketing or the guillotine, if you will. However, you can see already there's a little bit of horizontal shift there. I'm not able, I should say, to really fine-tune the placement beyond bracketing the body of the target or the B zone of the target at that distance inside those 2 alliers on the RMR. If I was using something with just a round hood, like a Delta Point or a Venom or a Viper, I don't know if I would have been able to shoot that well at that distance without some kind of help. Moving it back to the 5, this is where things start to fall apart a little bit. I'm still able to deliver some accurate hits, but the gun gets away from me a little bit and my fine-tuned placement just isn't there because I don't have a point of reference to help me fine-tune my alignment of the gun to the target. I'm still able to get hits, and that's fine, but I didn't get the hits that I was supposed to get. There's some rounds that have just disappeared, and that's not something that we ever want to see. Moving it back to the 15, of course, my personal feeling, this is the litmus test. If you had to take a shot with a blocked optic to where you couldn't see through it at this distance, you have to make sure you get your hits. Of course, if you have to take the shot, you have to take the shot, and we don't want to get into this anecdotal fantasy land or the functional hypothesi of deciding when and where and how and this is going to happen and you would have been able to do this or you wouldn't have been able to do it, trying to armchair a situation that we're literally making up in our mind before it's ever even occurred. But at 15, I'm really not able to get the precision that I would like to get. Now, you can practice using a non-improved aiming method on an optic window, or I should say an optic body, to great proficiency. I have some regular alumni who've been taught the method that I teach, and they've been able to develop it to a high level proficiency. A couple of them are more consistently accurate than I am, and that's definitely something that I'm super proud of. But this is a method that I can give to a shooter who doesn't necessarily have the time and or the money to invest in developing this secondary technique. Now, if you carry one of these optic equipped handguns for self-defense, or you carry one for duty, it's kind of incumbent upon you to develop at least a basic skill set, being able to hit practically accurate at distances such as the ones I shot, 3, 5, 7, 15, 20, 25. You should definitely be able to hit a man-sized target at 25 consistently with some degree of time constraint in order to be able to trust the optic and trust your ability. In the event that the optic fails and you cannot see through the optic window, you're still going to be able to get the hits. But This is something that I just kind of occurred to me, and it gives me the ability to control a little bit better that elevation of the barrel, because if I can see the top of the optic, I can see more of that line. I know, okay, my barrel is elevated, and it's probably elevated to such a degree that I'm going to shoot over the target. If you've got the time and the patience and the range that will allow it, you can put up a silhouette target, and you can throw a piece of butcher paper behind it that's, you know, three or 4 feet taller, and actually see what that elevation will result in as far as a miss over the top of your target. Finally, let's take a look at the two targets side by side. All right, so here's our two targets. This is our improved method. We've got 15 rounds total on paper, only 6 in the A zone, not bad. We've got 14 total in the B zone with 15 hits on paper. Now going over to the unimproved method, we've got 15 rounds total on paper, which is good. We've got 8 in the A zone, which depending on, you know, circumstance and conditions, that may be normal for you, it may not be. For me, I generally shoot better with the improved method, but we've got only 11 rounds inside the B zone. So if you were going as an aggregate score and the whole goal was that practical accuracy of B zone hits, the improved method would be better. Now your experiences may vary. This may be something that takes you to get used to. If you've already been shooting with the guillotine method, you may have already developed proficiency with it, that this is not something that you're going to try. My personal feeling is we tend to not practice the things we're most uncomfortable with. So there might be a lot of shooters watching this right now that haven't even come up with or started to practice a technique for in the event that their optic window becomes blocked by whatever blocks it. When I practice this, I use masking tape or I use painter's tape, and it works really, really well. As you saw in the video, when I've taped both of them with the masking tape. Painter's tape is really good too, because it's inexpensive and it doesn't leave any kind of residue on the lens itself. What it's going to come down to is if this is something that you feel is going to be beneficial to your style of shooting and your needs as a shooter, be it occupational or personal self-defense. My personal feeling is this is in a more improved method. In the event that my optic fails, it's something that's going to give me a little bit more refined point of aim than I would get otherwise until newer technologies come. And of course, this is more prone to your open emitter optics, but even name point, depending on conditions, can have the rear or the front lens blocked. It's definitely something that's possible. So this is something that needs to be part of your practice. You need to develop some kind of skill set for this type of shooting with the handgun if you're going to carry one for self-defense or for duty purposes. I'm Aaron Cowan with Sage Dynamics. Train accordingly.